nose specialist.
Yeah,
Because
well,
if they're carrying that much weight down.
well, we
down
think that what
their
they might have done is that, I mean, these metal objects would have had some softer substance attached to the part that goes inside. And these are just some other examples of beautiful pectoral objects, things that would have been worn on the chest, representation of birds, and other this would have been a headdress with golden feathers. This is a fun little object. It's actually a squatting jaguar that would have held powdered shell that would have been used for chewing coca leaves. There are little figures on rafts that come from Highland, Colombia. I'm going to skip over that object just a little bit. There are also a number of objects from Mexico, including Olmec statuary, jadeite masks, probably funerary masks.
That's made from a solid piece of jadeite?
Made from a solid piece of jadeite.
Good gracious.
This is an Olmec object that was later decorated with Maya inscriptions on the back of it.
Is that a gorget?
Yeah, it's actually probably worn on either the chest or on a headdress. We don't know which one, but it's been perforated so it can be attached to clothing. Beautifully carved shell that's been rubbed with cinnabar, so you can see the red designs, the designs in red. And then we included lots of representations of individuals who were wearing lots of bling, so you could see how the ancient Maya kings would have dressed themselves in feathers and pectorals and other objects. There are also painted Maya vessels. This one actually has writing on it that show exactly what it was that the Maya kings were wearing. And then we also have carvings in stone.
These are all symbols of status.
All of which are symbols of status, but status that derives from knowledge, status that derives from political power, status that derives from medical healing power, status that derives from the ability to adjudicate problems, status that derives from knowledge of stories of the ancestors and the ability to tell part of one's history. Status came from a whole bundle of different types of things. And these objects are physical representations of that esoteric knowledge.
Right.
This is a Maya carving from the site of Palenque, which shows a Maya king wearing some of that spectacular jewelry. But I'll just go through some of these other objects kind of quickly. This is the mask, the death mask of the wife of a Maya king at Palenque, made out of a green stone. This is actually not jadeite, it's a related stone, but probably a portrait, the closest that we get to portraiture in ancient Maya art. These are two headdress ornaments made out of carved jade. And you're familiar with making projectile points, like arrowheads. The Mayas would use the same technique of working stone to make portraits of their rulers out of chert. There were also objects from Chichen Itza and the Yucatan, including serpents, chalk mules, and jadeite and gold discs, jadeite jewelry, traded gold objects from Costa Rica. And then to finish up, a number of objects that came from Mexico, including the Mexico Gulf Coast, Huastec sculptures, some of which represented gods associated with death and sacrifice. Here you can see a sort of the notorious opening of a chest with the heart exposed. We're beginning to get into Aztec heart sacrifice in the areas where those things were practiced. These are beautiful shell pectorals that were made out of pieces of whelks that were then carved and infilled with red decorations. This is an Aztec ceramic vessel with a really dramatic representation of this staring individual, probably shouting. And actually it's a hollow vessel. We don't know whether it was used to emit sounds of any kind. Turquoise masks, this one of an Aztec warrior, covered with hundreds of pieces of turquoise. Now you're probably familiar with the turquoise of the American Southwest. The Aztec turquoise workers went completely over the top in terms of turquoise. Now this is turquoise that they had obtained from the American Southwest, but overlaid onto wood. And this is a wood carving with each individual piece of turquoise individually shaped so that it would fit onto this mosaic. These are some other examples of turquoise mosaics made of thousands of pieces of individual turquoise with representations of warriors. Here you can see a detail on this object. Another Aztec ceramic vase, this one with a figure wearing the symbol of gold. And then carvings in jade, which have matching pieces in gold. This is a representation of an Aztec goddess. You can see that she's known as the person with the bells on her cheeks. And we actually have examples of the bells, and we have examples of the ear ornaments that she's wearing. So it's especially wonderful when you're able to have something that's a representation in artwork, and you're able to find the actual objects that were probably worn by an individual who is depicted in the artwork or who is representing it. And then in the Great Temple of the Aztecs in Mexico City, they found objects that were archaeological objects. Much, much more ancient objects were included in some of the offerings at the main temple, including masks of the Olmec masks, masks from the Teotihuacan culture. And then towards the end of the exhibition, we featured some of these manuscripts, including manuscripts that were collected by the Spanish that showed feather work and gold work being undertaken by Aztec artisans, which is something the Spanish paid careful attention to. There were some of these deerskin books and codices, including this famous one known as the Nuttall Codex, which shows the history of a Mixtec king. There are tribute records of the Aztecs, and then we also had some Spanish period documents that essentially show the Spanish persecuting the natives and taking their gold.
How much of this material is now in Spain?
A great deal of it. An enormous amount of it is in Spain, and actually we had objects from Spain in the exhibition. For me, one of the most dramatic objects in the exhibition was this one. Doesn't look like much, does it?
No.
It's about that long. It's a bar of solid gold.
Oh my God.
But it was excavated in 1982 in a neighborhood of Mexico City that corresponds to the route of the Noche Triste, or the Sad Night, in 1521, when Cortez and his soldiers essentially packed themselves up with as much gold as they could steal. And under the fire of the Aztec warriors, with the assistance of the Tlaxcalans, they made their way out of the city, but at tremendous loss of men, some of whom fell and died along the way. This gold bar was probably being carried by one of the Spaniards who didn't make it.
Oh my God.
But the bar itself represents Aztec gold craftsmanship that has been crushed and melted down and cast into an ingot so that it could be stolen.
Oh my gosh.
And so this ingot probably was made in 1521 and is part of the legacy of the Spanish conquest. Well, another part of that legacy, and I'll just finish up here, are objects like this. This is a 1539 panel showing dedicated to Saint Gregory. It's made on wood, but if you look very carefully, you'll see that it represents indigenous craftsmanship of the kind that I've been showing you. All of the colors that you see laid on wood are bird feathers.
Oh my
They're
God.
feathers that come from Quetzal. The green in the letter comes from Quetzal feathers. The yellow comes from hummingbird feathers. The blue also comes from hummingbird feathers. The entire design has been laid onto wood, feather by feather, to create the design that was sketched out by the Spanish, but finished by an indigenous artist.
Amazing.
And then the last object in the exhibition, to sort of wrap it all up, was this beautiful painting, which comes from Ecuador, and actually represents a portrait of a king of northern Ecuador and his 2 sons, who came to visit one of the Spanish lords in Quito. And while they were in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, a wealthy patron commissioned a portrait of these men so that he could send it to Philip II of Spain and show that they were loyal servants. And this kind of brings together the whole story. They're holding spears with steel spear points. They're dressed in silk tunics, some of which are done in the style of the tunics of the ancient Indian kings. They're wearing necklaces made out of shell ornaments, and they're wearing traditional gold indigenous jewelry. But there's something interesting that you'll notice about these men. Oh, they're also wearing, one of them is carrying a typical Spanish hat. So essentially you're seeing this beautiful syncretism of the indigenous and the Spanish, but these men are not Indians. These men are black.
Yeah.
And they're part of a really remarkable story on the north coast of Ecuador.
Slaves?
A Spanish slave ship was bringing slaves south to Lima along the Pacific coast when it wrecked off the coast of Ecuador. And during the shipwreck, the slaves killed their Spanish captors, went ashore, and established a kingdom on the north coast of Ecuador. And the king of that kingdom is being welcomed into the Spanish fold with the accoutrements of shell, of gold, of steel, of textile, but representing this blending of populations that happens as a result of the Spanish
That
contact.
story happened in more than that place. I think that happened in Grand Cayman also, where a shipwreck.
There are many examples of that. One might even talk about the nation of Haiti as being an example of,
yeah.
of a successful slave rebellion. But anyway, I'll finish with that. I'm sorry that I've gone on a little bit long.
Well, I can understand why we catch you coming off of this leave of yours, and you're filled up to the brim on this stuff, right?
Thank you very much, John.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
If you come back, we'll have you back, you can tell the rest of the story.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. As I said, this is the first time anyone's asked me to talk about this here.
That amazes me.
Yeah.
And you know, some people say the objects speak for themselves, but in fact, what I've given you here is something very similar to a gallery talk. If you had joined me in a tour of the exhibition, this is how I would have led you
Why don't
through
you
the
volunteer to
objects.
do a program at the library or something?
This is something I could easily do at the public library if people were interested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point, can I borrow the book?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
I would just think I just